So now let's talk more about the actual practice of epidemiology. So it begins with knowing what causes a particular disease from Cook's postulates, but it's studying disease in populations. So it could be in our local King University population. It could be in our Sullivan County population. It could be in the US, it could be in the whole world. So epidemiology is looking at populations and studying who has a disease, how many people have a disease, how did they get it, how fast is it spreading, and then also what can we do to halt it or prevent it in the first place. If you like the theory of healthcare but not so much like the day-to-day patient care, this is a good thing to consider. And it's quite related to public health as a field. So let me go back to this one for a minute. So within epidemiology, there are a lot of different organizations in the whole world that do epidemiology work. And I'm going to go from the largest to the smallest. And these are some, if I write an abbreviation, you should know what it stands for. What's this one?
World Health Organization.
Yeah, World Health Organization. This one depends on cooperation between countries. So we live in a really interconnected world. It's helpful if nations and nations cooperate with each other to help track disease worldwide. So World Health Organization is the big one for the whole world, yes.
Is that what you were talking about when countries don't be sending off those like crazy viruses?
It's a related concept, yeah. Yeah. The interesting thing to think about is how does the World Health Organization get countries to do things? They don't have a lot of actual power to say, you must do this, country Z. It depends on cooperation. Then we come down to the US organizations. Okay, so when I was young, it was just CDC. So this is in the US Centers for Disease Control. And they have added on, correctly, prevention. So let's not just try to control disease, let's try to prevent disease. CDC, and people still call it CDC, but technically they've added on the P for prevention. This is the one for the US. So within the US, the CDC is fairly powerful in saying, yes, you have to do this because it's a federal law, blah, blah, blah. And the CDC, where is the CDC?
DC?
It's not, surprisingly. I mean, there is some of it there, but what's the main big CDC center in the U.S.? It's in Atlanta, which is kind of surprising that it's not in D.C., but Atlanta is the main location. But there are CDC employees all over the nation. And one of our biology graduates now works for the CDC in epidemiology, and she her special thing is when people get injured in national parks, let's track that. Like, okay, that's very specific, but there is that much breadth to what the CDC does. Yeah.
Isn't don't they house any disease that ever comes up and they just store it?
That's one of the things that they do. So they keep pathogen collections.
It's like someone can attack the CDC and release all that
They have quite strict controls on those. Yeah.
I remember I was watching Criminal Minds, and then the dude was trying to do anthrax all over the subway.
Oh, yeah.
So then the last scene, they just show this man walking into a building. There's just big vaults of everything, and he just opens it up. There's this big steel door. He opens it up, sticks it in there, and walks out. And as he's walking out, they just zoom in on
that messed with my head.
Like a bunch. I'm like,
yeah.
Dang,
I mean, that's related. That's related to real life.
And there's all stuff people didn't know about.
Yeah, it's like the things the government just doesn't tell you that they don't even want you to know that they just deal with it under your
Yeah.
wraps.
Yeah.
Crazy.
There's a lot of fun jobs in infectious
That's
disease.
not fun.
I think it'd be
Knowing
fun.
about all the things that can kill you that people don't know about.
That's why you be careful.
Didn't some ex-soldier just sent something to the military? Or like,
Yeah, I
what
saw
figures, was
that.
it ricin or is it
I think it was
anthrax?
ricin.
What is that?
Ricin is a toxin.
Okay, so it's not anthrax related.
I didn't watch it.
I think it's not pathogen related.
Okay.
They sent you
It's not a live
I think they tried to send it like
pathogen.
Mike Pence and a couple others.
Yeah,
It's so good. Oh.
yeah.
Is
But-
it-
envelope or something?
Yes, those kind of things, CDC would be involved with it.
Okay.
Then you get down, still going with the U.S., state departments of health. So there are people that have careers working for the Tennessee State Department of Health, same for Kentucky, same for Virginia. And they focus specifically on individual states. So they're kind of in between the CDC and then local health departments. Which in the U.S., local health departments are based on counties for the most part. That's how it is here. County health department. So for these to work together, there has to be, someone has to decide, okay, what data do we want to collect and store and archive and analyze? How are we going to share that data? And how are we going to analyze that data? So, record keeping, statistical tracking across populations, doing statistics, doing math, doing field collection. For epidemiology to work well, there has to be a lot of cooperation at all levels. The place where this would most affect you in your career is there are certain reportable diseases. So that's this handout right here. Tennessee Department of Health, reportable diseases and events. And you'll notice this is a front back page of a lot of different diseases that if you find out that a patient has that, you have to report it. For you all, you report it to the county and they report it to the state. And the state most likely is going to report it to CDC. It's not the same thing as saying, let me pick out a person. Nathan Brown has syphilis, y'all. It's not that, no. A patient, a 37-year-old white male in Sullivan County was reported to have syphilis. So it's de-identified from names. It's not to shame people. It's to try and spot, oh, do we have a emerging syphilis problem in Sullivan County? Yes.
They don't do that like with HIV or AIDS. Like I thought they get their name dropped.
Everything on here, and I would think that would be on here.
They need to, like, if you got AIDS or HIV, like they would make you get a tattoo.
No, I would
Before
disagree with that. I would disagree with that.
I think that's like wearing the A in that one. Was that one book?
Oh yeah, that HIV is
Yeah,
is
so
category 3. Yeah, so
I didn't read it.
names, like this is so long, like you have to go and search. Names are not reported, but incidences are reported. However, if you had something like Ebola, there are ways that you can put people into isolation if they have something that is that serious and transmissible and immediate emergency. But anyway, this is a long list of diseases. These are the ones that it's important to identify where are they happening so that we can try to prevent them from spreading further. And this is not a list of every infectious disease. Seems like a lot, but it's not all of them. This form is something that like Brandon, have you ever had to fill out something like this, or do you?
We
How
don't.
have you don't?
We don't.
Okay.
Because I'm pretty sure the people over our, like the, I think Stanley and them deal with all that.
Yeah.
We personally don't. Now, I know we have to like put people in isolation, but
Mhm.
we don't ever actually have to do the
Have to do
reporting.
the
We have
form.
people that do that,
Yeah. Yeah.
thankfully. Otherwise, I've been messing up for weeks. For
You
years.
hope you don't have to do this. Yeah.
Get a bunch
But-
of emails later.
That kind of information is reported so that it can be used to help public health, which also affects individual health. There are four definitions of defining disease in populations, which are shown. There's some maps shown here to say, how do you know which is which? So these are some definitions that I want you to add to your definition list and know how do these relate to each other. They all end in ic. So the epidemiology ones, these definitions end in the suffix ic, ic. And I'm going to go through how do you define a disease in a population as one particular one of this. So the first one is endemic. Endemic. And they're showing on these maps where the red dots are. That's like there's a case of this disease at this place at this time. So we can't analyze this stuff if no one reports it. You got to be reported to analyze disease patterns in this way. So endemic refers to a disease that occurs in predictable places at predictable frequencies. So if you looked at, I think this is something like valley fever or something like that. Or it's a disease that tends to occur in desert rat populations in this area, and they pass it to people at a particular rate, and it's about like that every year. So you would not see it in Maine, you don't see it in Tennessee, you see it in this place, it's about that many every year, it's kind of stable, it's kind of predictable. And most endemic diseases have something to do with the environmental cause. So it's kind of like, yeah, that's not surprising. It's usually that way every year. It's in that place every year. That's endemic. Sporadic. Sporadic is something different. So sporadic is kind of like you have unpredictable, random, varied incidence of a disease. Like this one, we would say, well, there's no rhyme or reason to where that shows up. And like sometimes over here, sometimes over there. It doesn't rise to the level of, like we need to really urgently do something about this, because it's here and there, it's kind of a low level. Here and there, no rhyme or reason. Probably not something that's an emergency. That's sporadic. Okay. The ones that tend to really catch the eye of health organizations are epidemic. And the definition of what epidemic is misunderstood, like both by the general public and from my history students in this class. So if something is considered epidemic, what it really means is that the frequency, whatever the disease frequency, is increasing at an increasing rate. Which if we relate that to physics, we would say it's accelerating. It's accelerating. You cannot detect an epidemic with just one time point. So if we look today, what is this, October. If we take October snapshot of influenza right now in the U.S., and that's all we do. We can't tell what's going on if we don't know how many there were last week, and if we don't look how many there were next week. So over time, is a disease accelerating or not? It doesn't have to be a lot of cases to be an epidemic. It has to be looking like a snowball effect is coming. Does that make sense? Like my mom keeps telling me there's a hepatitis epidemic in Kentucky. Okay. What that means is not that everybody in Kentucky has hepatitis. That's not true or useful. But that, like every month that passes, there's a larger and larger number of people in Kentucky that have hepatitis. Even if it's only 0.5% of the people. I don't know. It's made up. But you've got more cases increasing rapidly in a given location. What do these places have in common with each other? You see the dots?
The travel destination.
Travel destinations?
I don't know, I guess.
Maybe. What
They're all
else?
by bodies of water. Or no, they're not. Yeah, they are.
They are by bodies of water.
They're clusters.
There's clusters of dots. Those are big cities. They've got Chicago in the wrong place. It really ought to be over there. It's misleading.
That's kind of
So,
by Indianapolis.
no, it's not.
Oh.
Jacksonville, like maybe this is
Same.
Houston, Phoenix, LA, Chicago. I think that this was either a disease related to needle-based drug use or an STD. And it's not to say that people in cities are just more evil than country people, but it's easier for diseases to spread fast in cities because there's more people in the cities to spread it to each other. So, space is good. Stay out of my space. Like if you think back to days of AIDS epidemic, like back in the 80s, it wasn't that so many people had HIV/AIDS. It was that, it went from 10 people to 1,000 people really quickly. So it's the speed and the acceleration, it's not the numbers. Pandemic, if you understand epidemic, pandemic is like it, except pandemic is epidemic on multiple continents.
So worldwide.
Yeah. If we say that something is pandemic, it has to have spread continents. And now that plane travel is relatively cheap, if there is a disease in one country, you can assume if World Health Organization and national governments don't really take steps, it will spread to other locations. So if I were to draw this for Zika, this first dot might not be in the right place, but I think it's on the other side of Australia. So Zika started like somewhere there, and then it jumped to South America, and then it started coming up this way. This was probably when y'all were in high school. Remember people freaking out about Zika?
Yeah, like the babies get born.
Birth defects, and then the Olympics were here at that time, and that was very scary. Zika has spread up to about here, but then it seemed like it stopped, which is fortunate and unsuspecting and unanticipated that it stopped. The last reliable stuff that I read about it said that there seems to be something about the environment in South America, Central America, that makes it worse there, but we don't know why yet. Don't know why yet.
I feel like it was getting close to America, so then the CDC stopped. They didn't let nobody know.
I feel like they would let people know if they were successful in stopping it. And I remember the CDC and public health was very worried about that because they didn't get money very timely manner for what was coming. And then there was a battle over what do we do with the extra Zika money? And I want to say, like, what do you mean extra Zika money? It could come back here again. So a lot of times governments and World Health Organizations and CDCs, like they've got this much money and there are this many emergencies and you have to decide where to put it. Zika showed up in the 50s and people started studying it back then, but it wasn't an emergency, so it didn't get funded. What else we got here? That's actually going to be the end for today. So there is a section in here on diagnosing. It's interesting stuff, but I'm not going to go through it. On Friday, remember that we're starting immune system. So we have a little bit of immune system stuff on Friday. Then's the weekend. Monday is a review day. Wednesday is the exam.
Okay, I'm studying.